Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Willard Preacher podcast. Again, I'm Matt, a former Penn State student, having a conversation here with Gary, who is known far and wide as the Willard Preacher. He's wrapped up another semester, and we're going to be continuing our conversations, I guess, as time goes on. So welcome, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing just fine, thanks.
Good.
So let's start with kind of our opening segment, the week at Willard. So you just wrapped up the spring semester at Penn State. Any interesting interactions of lately of note?
On Friday, I guess we had this Muslim guy come by. He's come by many times, and he always tries to convince me that the Bible is not trustworthy or something along those lines by bringing up contradictions or saying the earliest writings we have or the earliest copies we have are from like 130 AD or something. And so he's doing that again this time. And I finally, I've answered a lot of these before, and I finally said, look, it doesn't matter. You can find, even if you could find contradictions in the Bible, and there are some, but that aren't meaningful. Mark has a different amount of times the rooster crowed before Peter denied Christ than the others. You might find something like that. It really doesn't matter. You won't find any doctrinal contradictions. But even if you did, it wouldn't matter, because we didn't get our beliefs from the Bible, like we were trying to say the other week. We got them from the church. So the church had all her beliefs. I kept trying to tell them this. The church had all her beliefs before one book of the Bible was written. We have confirmation from the disciples of the disciples and their disciples and their disciples and their disciples. So, he was talking about whether Jesus was considered to be God or not. So that even if you could discredit the Bible, which I really don't think you can, but even if you could, it wouldn't matter, because we didn't get our beliefs from the Bible. And he was saying, of course, that the disciples put that Jesus was God in after Jesus's death. And I was like, well, what's the point of that? Why would they do that? I mean, the people back then, they respected prophets. If they just wanted to get Jesus' message out, and he said he was just a prophet, it was much easier to get it out by saying Jesus was a prophet than saying he was God. That's a much harder sell. Why would you do that to yourself? And if we ever get into evidences of the resurrection, and they all went to their death claiming that Jesus was God and rose himself from the dead. Why would you do that if he never said that and he never did that? Why would you give your life for something like that, including being tortured, some of them? So he didn't really understand that, because Islam's all about the Quran, and they have this idea that Judaism, which Judaism pretty much is, it's not really that much either, and Christianity is all about the book. Mm-hmm. And no matter how many times I try to tell them Christianity isn't about the book, but Protestantism makes it all about the book. So when you come from the Orthodox perspective and say, no, it's not about the book, it's about the church and her tradition, he just wasn't getting it. So we went round and around and around. Finally, I said, look, we're just saying the same thing over and over again. Maybe we can pick this up next year over the summer or something.
Yeah.
But just if all the Bibles in the world just disappeared today, we'd still have all our beliefs. Mm-hmm. If we had nothing left but the services, we'd have all our beliefs. Then we'd have holy men and women who are close to God, who could reproduce it if they had to. So that makes us very different from Protestantism, and I don't know so much about Catholicism, but certainly Protestants, and how the Muslims view Christianity because of Protestantism.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and he was he's a student of philosophy, so he was sort of outlining. He's like, the only reason we really read Aristotle now is because it was preserved through Islam. And so there's an awful lot of, let's say, our philosophical foundational ideas and approaches that come through Aristotle that ultimately come through Islam historically. And what was interesting that he pointed out, and this might not be entirely related to what your conversation was like, but it is, I don't know, it's a neat thing to point out. He was basically saying, when in the West, when they started using sort of a very rationalistic philosophical approach, so much of that was based on Aristotle, and not just Aristotle, but Aristotle as coming through Islam. So there's certain parts of sort of Western theology that the whole approach, the whole argumentation as to who God is and how we know about God, in some ways is reflective of Islam in a lot of ways in Western Christianity. They start with, whereas for the Orthodox, of course, we start with God is person. We have the three persons of the Godhead, and we talk about them individually, and then we talk about and then in light of that, they are united in essence. Whereas in the West, the starting point is really the unity. And of course, you could say that Islam is very Unitarian, and Western Christianity can be very Unitarian, even getting to the point of, Unitarianism, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that you've come across, because in some ways their approach, they're speaking the same language. They're reasoning, they're making these arguments about how they know about God, which is, we start with this book, and we know certain philosophical ideas about God, and we reason to it. That's always been my experience in talking to Muslims is, they kind of want to make they want to make a philosophical argument about it. And we just, and basically we can just say, well, that's not who God has revealed himself to be. They can, for example, they'll say that the Trinity doesn't make sense in some sort of philosophical way. It's like, okay, God is one, God is three. Yeah, that's beyond our little minds. But that's how God has revealed himself, because that's who he is. So yeah, it's very interesting that to hear your experience, because it sounds like getting through that sort of starting with the book from a philosophical standpoint, getting beyond that is a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, and the key is who God has revealed himself to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep saying, because I asked him, well, how did you come to believe in Islam? And he said, well, I researched. I said, well, number one, that's not the way to find God. You can, even if you were unbiased, I said, you're not. You came from a Muslim country. You grew up in a Muslim country. Islam was ingrained in you from childhood. So yes, if you research other religions, your bias is going to be towards Islam anyhow. But I said, we don't come to, you can't say you have the right God because you were born into the right family. You can't say you have the right God because you were born into the right culture, because you don't know that. He said, if you were born in Israel and the Jewish culture, you probably wouldn't be Islamic right now, probably be Jewish. You can't know it just by researching. You have to seek out God, and God has to enlighten you in some way. And he really didn't get that, because they said, well, we have the Quran. I said, well, how do you know the Quran is? How do you know it came from an angel? Mm-hmm. Well, you know what Muhammad said. Mm-hmm. So how do you know that? You're just taking his word for it. So you're not going to convince me that Christianity isn't true through your reasoning or through your quoting of the Quran or anything else you do, because God has revealed himself to me. God is, that's the only reason that I know that Christianity is true. Not because I studied all the world religions, because then I just would have picked the one that seemed the best to me. And I could still be wrong. So I don't think that they get that, because they don't have that. And I said, look, in Islam, you have one person, one God. Before he creates anything, there's nobody else but him. There's no relationship there. There's no love there, which demands relationship. So it's questionable whether he even by nature can enter into relationships, right? Whereas in the Trinity, you have the three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They've always loved each other. They've always been in relationship with each other. And they invite us into that relationship. So I said, it's no wonder that Islam's a law-based religion, or religion just of the book, because there's no evidence that the Islamic God can even enter into relationships inherently. And if he did, was he missing something? Did he create us because he had some sort of need? And they say, oh, no, he didn't have a need.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then how is he by nature relational if he's all alone?
Mm-hmm.
Is a relation within himself and solely to himself? Can he get outside of that? And they really don't have the answers for that. And we believe in one God, the Father. So we believe everything goes back to the personhood of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Not even just a common essence, which is impersonal, but the personhood of the Father. And so it's all about relationship. And it's all of us coming into that relationship. It's not about a book, it's not about a law. It's not legalistic. Everything about it, which may seem legalistic, because sometimes it gets put that way, is to further the relationship. So I know a lot of people say, well, Christianity is not a religion. I understand what they mean by that. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to make ourselves good enough for God. But if you want to say it is a religion, the religious part of it is that which tells us how to further the relationship. Mm-hmm. Explains to us, this is how you get closer to God. This is how you get rid of your sin. This is how you get rid of your passions. And as you do so, you'll get closer to God. So if there is a religious aspect to it, that's it. Those are the teachings, but they're all about the relationship. It's not a legalistic thing, which it is in Islam at least, and I think it's become that in Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of these things where it is hard to have those conversations, because we're talking about, when we say revelation, that the revelation for a Muslim person is the book. Like, they sometimes refer to the Quran as the revelation. And that is like the one and only way that God makes anything known to man, is through this book, which then how do you ever confirm the veracity of that book? But on the other hand, and certainly, Christians, especially Protestant Christians, can say, yeah, God revealed himself. That's why we have the Bible. And they fall into that kind of same pathway. We would say, actually, no, the second person of the Godhead became man. That's the primary way that God was initially, fully revealed. We could, you could literally look God in the face and hear his words. And then with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, then it's actually, direct relationship, direct experience of God that cuts through all that, true revelation.
Yeah, I was trying to tell you, look, if you look all the way through the Bible from the beginning, from Adam and Eve on, God is revealing himself. Mm-hmm. Even at the Mount, when they come out of Egypt, God says, get all the people together, fast, don't have sex with your wives. And he revealed himself on the mountain, in kind of a physical way, with lightnings and thunders and everything that scared everybody. And they said, okay, Moses, you deal with God. We don't deal with this God. But nonetheless, and then the fire by night, the cloud by day, he revealed himself to prophets and kings and so on. And then, of course, when Jesus came, and then the giving of the Holy Spirit, he reveals himself to everybody. It doesn't have to be this big, thunder and lightning experience. You can grow up in the faith, and God can make himself known without such a big experience. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to think, oh, I didn't have some big experience. Maybe God doesn't reveal himself to me. You take communion, the body and the blood of Christ. If you take that seriously and you do the fasting and everything, slowly over time, God reveals himself more and more. But that's the nature of the relationship with God, not a legalistic or simply giving of a book that somebody else got. Mm-hmm. Like Mormonism is the same thing.
Yeah.
Joseph Smith supposedly, got these revelations, and everybody has to believe that he got them. Mm-hmm. Right. We believe that the apostles walked with Jesus because Jesus lets us know that he is God, and that Christianity is the true religion. However he does that, whenever he does it in your life, that's how we know.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And it's different for different people, like you said. And, I have a friend who, he said, I guess he kind of grew up exposed to Christianity and kind of floated away from it. But then as an adult, I guess more recently, he was encountering these like non-Christian ideas, and he was finding it kind of off-putting. And he said, oh, I guess I know, I guess I believe this, like it was confirmed what inside of him, what he knew to be true, and somehow that it's, now if he was maybe I don't know, a different person might say, well, that's, I feel a little more skeptical than that. Then they press on until God opens their eyes perhaps more clearly, but one way or another, it gets confirmed.
Yeah, everybody's different,
Mm-hmm.
and God knows what we need. And some people need more, and some people don't need less. And what's good, like you said, what's good enough for one person might not be good enough for the next person.
Mm-hmm.
They might need something more. If you continue to seek after God, and you continue to ask Him to make it clear to you, and you continue to only want to know truth, which is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say, like the one guy said, I'm going to search for God, but it can't be Christianity.
Right.
You're sure to get a deceiving spirit because you're not searching for truth.
Uh-huh.
Right. Or if you're Muslim or Jewish and you're seeking for God, but you only want your own religion confirmed to you, plenty of spirits that'll do that for you. And it will seem really good, but you open yourself up for that because you're not really seeking for the truth. You have an agenda. You want something to be confirmed to you. And there's plenty of spirits out there that'll do that. So you always have to be a seeker after truth. It's the rest of your life, you have to be a seeker after truth. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know if I've said this before or not, but what I tell people, what I tried to tell him was, deceptions always look good. That's why that's why you're deceived. They look good. They glitter like diamonds and gold. They stretch as far as the eye can see. They're not very deep. So if you're always seeking for truth, you're going to eventually find that glitch in them, a thing that shows you this isn't real. Or God can step in and show you that and say, this isn't real, because you're seeking for truth. So that's why we should always be seeking for truth. And because God is truth. If you're always seeking for truth, you're eventually going to find God Himself.
Mm-hmm. Good. Do you think you could give an example of that sort of deception, either like someone that you knew or your own personal experience?
Well, I mean, just in general, I think a lot of people, when they get a spiritual experience, a lot of times that's good enough for them. A lot of times that's what people want, just a spiritual experience. Mm-hmm. Or people have come and told me, oh, yes, well, I was this and I sought for God, and God, I was Muslim, I don't even remember, but I was this or I was that, and I sought for God, and He made Himself known to me, and it was whatever religion they were. But it turns out, as you really question them, that they were just seeking for that religion to be confirmed to them. If that's all you want, and it's very, very difficult to get outside of that. I understand that. So you really have to want to know truth, and you have to be willing to walk away from an entire culture, or walk away from family members who aren't going to want you anymore. So, yeah, I have experienced that with people. I can't give you a specific example of it, but it does become clear after a while. And if somebody's really like, no, God revealed Himself to me as the Hindu god or goddesses or whatever. Okay, well, what are you going to do? You're at a stalemate at that point. Yeah. So we'll find out in the end. Good luck with that. We'll find out in the end. And that's about all you can do at that point.
That makes sense. So, I guess Friday was the last day of the spring semester for preaching at Penn State. I don't know, any reflections on the past year? Anything that stands out? Any reflections on this as your 40th year? Anything of that nature?
This particular generation is interesting because on the one, I was talking about somewhere around 2014 or so, everything changed. And there came a generation that knew not Joseph, so to speak, came a generation that knew not Christianity. And the last part of the millennials around that time, they were kind of not all of them, I made some good friends from there, but they were kind of a nasty generation. If you disagree, they were the microaggression. If you disagreed with them, they just hated you. They thought you were the worst thing in the world because you disagreed with them. Now, Gen Z comes along after them, the last few years, and they're different. They're not microaggression. There's still maybe elements of that, but generally speaking, they're not. Very nice people. They'll come up and talk with you, want to get a selfie with you and all that sort of stuff. But again, the problem is they don't believe they can know who God is. and that stops virtually everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very nice. They'll still get irritated with you and angry with you. They'll come up and ask you questions sometimes. They'll listen to your answers. They'll talk with you, but they just can't get past that. You can't know who God is. So they're talking to you and they don't really believe you know what you say you know, because nobody knows what you say you know.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't do it. So that they might be interested, or they keep coming back and they keep coming back and they get close and then get to a certain point and then they pull back. And they say, no, I'm not going any further.
Mm-hmm.
Because either they don't believe that they can know, or it's just that they don't want that responsibility, or whatever it is. Some of them will get up to a certain point and then they'll just pull back and you won't see them again. Or if they come by, that they've pulled back and they're going to go any further than that. So it does make it difficult. How do you make progress? I mean, there's still some. We have a couple of catechumens, not from Willard, but we have a couple of catechumens that are from the university. And there are obviously exceptions to any rule, to virtually any rule. And there are exceptions to this one. But for the most part, it's just can't know. So you can be as nice as you want to be, but you can't know. And there's this oneness of mind in this generation. And when I wrote the book, The Christian versus the University, I talked about oneness of mind. And it was nothing back then. I mean, I could see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was maybe more than it was. But comparing it to today is like night and day. So today there's oneness of mind, mostly from social media, mostly in the younger people. They're all on social media. So I may have given this example before, but they like to come up and take selfies the last few years. I've been there for a long time. They see me as kind of a part of the university and they want to get a picture with them, or maybe their parents, were here and they said, oh yeah, you got to go see the Willard preacher, whatever it is. So all of a sudden this year it changed to be real, which is, I guess you get a certain window of opportunity to take your picture to wherever you are or whatever. So all of a sudden, right from the fall, it wasn't, no, let's not do selfies here, take my be real. So you take the picture and it also takes a picture of you while you're taking their picture. Just changed like that. It wasn't a slow, gradual change. It was just boom. And the spring semester was all selfies. Beginning of fall semester, it's all be real. And it lasted pretty much the whole semester with only a few exceptions. That's that oneness of mind they have through social media. I've been talking with people recently about AI. And the AI, some people say, well, AI can become sentient one day. And I don't believe that. I think you need a soul, a rational soul like humans have to become sentient. But I don't think that's really, a program can have a will or a mind or something. Well, they can learn, they can make their program, yes, but it's always going to be a program. You're never going to have a rational soul. So the fathers say we have a rational soul as humans, animals have an irrational soul. We're self-aware. I know I'm a human and not a cow. I know I'm Gary and not Matt. The AI will never get there. But what it can do, I think, is further this oneness of mind, not just between young people, but between everybody. Because once it gets infiltrated into all the search engines and all that stuff, then it can be programmed. A lot of these people that are programming us, they're the one world, the world government people, and globalism and one world economic system and stuff like that. And they can program these things to lead people in that direction. I think that's probably, I tell people that technology is neutral, as we've said before, but the evil seem to use it better than the good. I think the evil are going to use it to further this oneness of mind, so that each step along the way to the Antichrist is going to seem like the natural next step. And I think there's been, Orthodox, prophets or whatever, holy men that have said that. That has to happen somehow. It has to happen somehow worldwide. And I think as everybody uses all this technology, it seems like that would be at least one way to get that oneness of mind. But ultimately, it's not going to be the AI that's going to be the problem. It's going to be the Antichrist, who's inhabited not by a computer, but by a computer program, but by the devil himself, by Satan himself. So anyhow, that kind of oneness of mind is out there. They all, now it's still in the younger generation, they all tend to think alike. You can kind of see that they're not totally on with the trans thing yet, but they will be as next generations come up. But it's all that, and it was never like that before. You could see it, but there was always a lot of dissenters. You could see the kernel of it. Seemed like it was more than it was back then. Now that's what it is. And as these people go on and they take their place in society, as the AI comes in and everything, I think you're going to find that more and more and more.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
And they don't need to defend all these things. To them, these things don't need to be defended. That's why we don't get in debates anymore. You really can't know the God is, you really can't know these things, but this is just the way the society is. This is the way the culture is. And modern culture is always better than ancient culture. So this must be the right thing.
Right.
It's very much indoctrination and brainwashing, but it's effective. And most aren't going to step outside of that. When you have the cancel culture on top of it, as we've talked before, most, just don't want to put themselves on the line like that. And I understand that, you don't want to lose your job. You want to get a job. You don't want, all this sort of stuff. You want to get promoted, you want to get tenure if you're a professor or whatever. So I understand that, but this is where it's all leading to. And it's quite clear that it's all leading to that. And it may just be in the younger generations now, but it's going to seep up into the older generations, or just these younger generations will eventually take their place as the older generation. And there's just going to be this oneness of mind that I think is going to lead inexorably to the Antichrist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really kind of frightening. Then it's one thing to say, well, we have this oneness of mind, and I mean, back when I was a college student, you might hear somebody say, well, who's it hurting if I'm doing this or that or whatever, and I'm sure plenty of that. But the fact that it sounds like so many of the kids who you're interacting with, they can't even conceive of why it would even be worth fighting about. Like they can't even, why are you, what's there to defend? This is just the way it is, and this is obviously better. Yeah, it's crazy when you've grown up with that kind of stuff, we've talked about this before. Like, I feel really fortunate to have basically grown up. I was, I think I was 18 before I had an email address. So we've grown up, before this total inundation of the technological culture. But to grow up with that, where you're just inundated all the time, has got to, I guess you can't see outside of the cave, No,
and when everybody around you is thinking the same thing. And it's being confirmed everywhere you go, especially by people you respect, but also by your peers, your professors. And then, of course, as we said before, the college students think of themselves, at least at Penn State, as kids. So I don't know anything. I'm just going to learn from the adults. So that indoctrination gets in there more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
But yeah, this thing about who does it hurt? When I'm doing this, who does it hurt? Whether it hurts anybody else, first of all, what we do, other people see. So the partying that goes on at Penn State, these, the students are out there. And when I was a student, I was out there, all weekend long, partying it up. And who sees that? Well, the high school kids. And when I was back there, it was junior high. Now it's middle school. They see it. They get influenced by it. So you might be out partying thinking it's just me. I'm not evangelizing partying. I'm not telling anybody else to have to party. But somebody seeing you who's younger, if they're influenced by you, then you bear responsibility for that, whether you know it or not. So one of the, I don't know, this is just my own opinion, but one of the reasons I think, you wait till the last judgment till the end is because we don't know how many people we've affected. So you're walking down the street and you're partying and you see a high school kid and he starts partying. And then he influences his kids, and he influences them kids and their kids and their kids and their kids. You may be partially responsible for that all the way down the line. Plus, if it's something that's immoral, it hurts you. When we think of who does it hurt, we think who does it hurt physically.
Yeah.
Maybe mentally or emotionally. But we're also moral beings. So if we're doing something immoral, it's hurting us morally, which is probably one of, at least as bad as almost as anything else, maybe worse. If we're hurt morally. So before you can say it's not hurting anybody else, you have to show that whatever you're doing is morally good. It's not morally good, it's hurting you, and it's hurting everybody who's influenced by you.
Right. Yeah. And I could see how, I mean, we could talk about, that human nature is united. That's probably not something that you're, that someone's going to respond to, but Adam and Eve sinned and it changed the entire cosmos, you know, and we're united. So if I sin, I'm hurting you actually. Um, but that's probably, I think the way that you're outlining that, for the person who's perhaps skeptical of a spiritual life, they probably, that's plenty for them to chew on, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. We're all kind of interconnected in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're right. At the same time, if people aren't very spiritual, they're not going to get that. They can get that it's hurting them, and they can get that they may be influencing others, and it may be hurting them.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what the moral is, what you're calling good, if it's not really good, then and you do influence people
Mm-hmm.
by your actions or by what you say on social media or whatever. And you might just be putting it out there, but you do it to influence people. And just by day-to-day conversations, things come up and you influence people. And you never know it because they may never come back and tell you, but you may have changed somebody's mind for the worse or for the better,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what you're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so holiness also works that way, like you can set a great example and you can influence people in a positive way, and that's all the more reason to seek the good.
Yeah, and you might never know that either.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just say, because I remember one time I was preaching and I just said something. It was just a sentence. And somebody came back later on and said they heard that sentence and it started to work on them. And then they went back to their dorms and they talked to Christians in the dorms. This is back when I was Protestant. And those Christians then brought this person to Christ. And that's what I've noticed over the years. Sometimes on occasion, it's these, you work out, you give these long, or whatever defenses of something, and somebody's influenced by that. But oftentimes it's just a sentence or a word or something that God uses to get into somebody's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know when you've said something like that. You never know because they may not even know you. They may never see you again. But you've said it, it's out there, and they're influenced by it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's important. Another reason why it's important to know the truth and to speak the truth and to know what's right and to speak it, and because you never know what effect that's going to have on somebody else.
Absolutely. Now, getting back to the sort of conformity of thought a little bit, it is interesting to me, probably back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, schools were probably a primary way that people's thought was formed and so on. As you're describing this, it occurs to me that, that sort of thing is almost obsolete, kind of doesn't matter where anybody goes if they are, let's say, attached to a little device, and the media is coming in all the time and they're constantly being reaffirmed in the same things over and over again. I mean, what an amazing way to form, this hive mind, this, totally predictable mass that can be turned in any direction at any time. It's awful.
Yeah, when you have that and you have the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going into the schools and you're getting it there. Then you have the devices and you're getting it there. You have your, virtually anywhere you go in society, you have it. It's very difficult not to be influenced by it.
Yeah. And
we as Christians, I know we said this before, but we as Christians really have to be on our guard because we can easily be influenced by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
We probably much less people who don't grow up Christian. They're just going to accept whatever the society says.
Yeah.
And today, since they think their kids still in college, they're not challenging any of it. They don't even know a reason why to challenge it.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they get out of college, they wouldn't even see a reason to challenge it because you can't know anyhow.
Yeah.
So it's all set up, for the forces that be to take us down a road that we shouldn't be going down. And there will be people who say things, and there will be dissenters, but the vast majority are just going to go along with it because why not?
Mm-hmm.
No reason not to.
Yeah.
It always comes back to God. Do you believe in God, specifically the God-man Jesus, or don't you? If you do, then you've got an authority greater than the state, greater than the culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, then the culture or the state is your highest authority.
Yeah.
And you're always going to go with your highest authority.
Yep. Definitely. Let's see. I'm just going to look at our agenda again. So just looking back, this is the end of the spring semester. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't want to think, maybe you just want to rest a little bit. But here's a question, though. In all your years out at Willard, can you think of any time or situation that was most challenging to you?
I would say there's two times. One of them is the one I just talked about. Mm-hmm. This is very challenging because how do you get past the idea that you can't know? Mm-hmm. So that's very challenging. The other one was, so that's like the last 8 years or so. The other one was the first 8 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. That was challenging because I had never experienced the sort of blowback that I was experiencing. So I thought I've always been kind of an idealist. So I thought, well, I'll go out there, I'll preach, and everybody will know that I'm trying to help them, and they'll appreciate it. And maybe there'll be 1 or 2 here that don't like it, but most will appreciate it, and it'll be great. But I never experienced the, I hate you. If I had a brick, I'd throw it at you, sort of things that you get while you're out there. And so what I realized probably very beginning of the 90s, God kind of showed me, again, not hearing any voices or anything, but just made it clear to me that I had resentment and unforgiveness over that. And, that I'd carried for a long time because I just didn't know how to deal with that. And I would say that's the hardest thing when you go out into this area. How do you deal with all the hatred? And it might only come from a minority of people, but when you're new at it, you kind of expand it and you think, well, everybody thinks that way. Mm-hmm. But once I realized it and once I repented of it and so on, just about that time is the time people really started to hang out at Willard. So those two things kind of coincided. And whether it was, I repented and so, I'm more approachable now and people start to hang out there, or God knew this new generation was going to start hanging out there. And so he wanted me to be approachable, or whatever it was. Once I got rid of that as much as possible, then things changed. People started hanging out, talking with people actually coming out to the house. So everything kind of changed at that point. So I would say to anybody who starts to get into that sort of stuff, into this sort of stuff, you got to be careful of that. Anytime you put yourself out there, especially now, you're going to get a lot of people that are hating you, and you have to learn how to deal with that. You have to learn how to let it go and not get to you. And that's a process. You don't just, you're not perfect at that right at the top. But so that was challenging. So between that, the first 8 to 10 years, and this last 8 or 9 years or so, with people saying you just can't know, you can't know, you can't know. Those two things are very challenging. In between there was really good. Because in between there, then this was part of the time that you were out there. People were coming out. Everybody was, you got that picture at the start of the podcast where people just hanging out on the steps there, and they're listening, they're engaging. We would hand out Bibles and they would take them, and New Testaments, and they would take them and want you to sign your name to them or whatever. So there was that period that was really good. And then you get to 2014, all that goes away. 2014 or so, all that goes away. And now we're in this new era where, everybody's nice now, but nobody is even, or few, if any, even have a reason to believe, even have a reason to think that they might be able to know. So those two, kind of the beginning and the end, the bookends.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's it's really kind of amazing that just how long you've been out there, that you've weathered 8 to 10 years and another 8 to 10 years, and you still had another 20 years of the good times.
Of in between. It's kind of half and half, huh?
Yeah,
you never know what's going to happen. Maybe it'll change again someday, and maybe you'll get a generation in there that rejects all this stuff, or at least is open to finding the truth.
Yeah.
I don't know, because kids these days are getting this right from elementary school. Mm-hmm. And so but maybe at some point they can wake up and say, no, something's wrong here. We can't just be going down this road. I don't know how it's going to go.
Yeah.
But so we just keep pounding away and see what happens.
Yeah. It seems like it would be more likely that if things are going to improve from a spiritual standpoint, things are going to have to get really, really, really bad, I would guess.
It could be, back in when I was really young. And there's a movie out by this I haven't seen yet. It's called The Jesus Revolution. It's kind of a Protestant Jesus people sort of awakening. But it was interesting because that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. At the same time, you have all this, hippie rebellion, secularism's coming in, it's changing the culture. There's bombings, there's assassinations, there's riots. And in the midst of that, you have this kind of awakening amongst the hippies to Jesus. And it was a Protestant thing. And I don't know how much effect it had ultimately, but it was right there in the midst of it. So you can have two things happening at once. You can have the culture continue to go down this road and get worse and worse. And at the same time, you can have an awakening amongst some in the culture, which may be a significant amount, but compared to everybody else, it's still going to be a minority. So at the time, this even made out of like Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell and so on, kind of spilled out into the regular culture. It didn't ultimately have the effect, maybe it slowed things for a little while, but the things keep going down. So you could have that today. You could have things continuing to go down this road inexorably to the Antichrist, getting worse and worse and worse. And then you can also, in the midst of that, have an awakening where people begin to awake to the truth, maybe awake to the church. And those two things can happen at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly, I mean, I guess in different parts of the country, we see different things. I'm living in Texas, so just generally the story is in the South that, Orthodox churches are seeing, unprecedented growth and things like that. Now, unprecedented growth for Orthodox, it would be probably historically pretty small for Protestant, mega churches or something. But what is maybe encouraging is that in the midst of all that, in the midst of society going really bonkers and a pandemic and, closing churches of all kinds, and in the midst of probably a lot of Western Christian churches, Western Christian entities kind of like, I don't know, disintegrating essentially, that like in the end, people are still hungry enough to find Orthodoxy, which, asks a bit more of you, and some people are looking for that thing that's asking a bit more of them. So yeah, I think we know how things are going to end. Things are going to go really, really bad until the Antichrist, and then Jesus wins. So we know how things are going to ultimately end. But in terms of our society, we know things are going to ultimately go in one pretty bad direction. But yeah, like you said, somewhere along the line, there does seem to be some folks out there who are looking for that pearl, and it's probably it's got to be really challenging because it's got to be challenging for you because you're dealing with, again, pretty young people. I would say probably that most of the people who are like catechumens at the church I go to, they're not 17, 18 years old or 20 years old. They're a little bit older. Maybe they have a family or something, they've had a little bit of time to kind of stew with it, and find things to be lacking and so on. So yeah, well, we shall see, I guess.
Yeah, we have a decent amount of catechumens right now, and some of them are younger. We have a family, some college students. So yeah, I mean, and I've noticed some other Orthodox churches that have a lot of catechumens in them. So there always are those people that are going to look for truth and aren't going to want, and are tired of rock and roll worship or whatever. It's shown to be shallow. It doesn't really do anything. And they're looking for something real. And so you're right. There are those people. And if you're in I don't really trust mega churches. I think in this day and age, if
Mhm.
you've got 10,000 people coming to your church, you're probably telling them what they want to hear. You're
Yeah.
giving a little sermon by Oprah or something, and having the rock band on there, making them feel good, and getting all these emotional experiences, thinking that God is doing something. So in this day and age, I think if you're really preaching the truth, you're going to get people in who are looking for that.
Mhm.
But at this point in time, anyhow, if you got a mega church, you're probably just telling people exactly what they want to hear, and they're coming because they know you're going to tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Kind of like the news outlets, you get a bunch of people in different news outlets because you're going to tell them what they want to hear.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of Christian churches are doing that, and you'll get the people in, but in the end, you haven't done them any good.
Absolutely. Yep. So the takeaway there is you have to tell people what they don't want to hear.
You have to tell them the truth, yeah.
That's it.
And if they don't like it, they don't like it.
That's it.
And that's hard to do because if you've got a church and you have to pay the bills, it's that practical part of it, and you want people to come in, and you think you can help, but if you get them in there under false pretenses,
Mhm.
then you really start, at some point preaching the truth, they're going to leave.
Mhm.
It's not under. So it's better to have fewer that are there because of truth than a lot that are there because you've watered down the truth.
Mhm.
So you can get a lot of people these days watering down the truth, or just not speaking about certain things.
Mhm.
You just don't. There's certain topics you just don't speak about because you don't want to offend people.
Yeah.
Well, it's better that they know that coming in,
Mhm.
and so if they're offended, they can leave before they even come in.
Right.
Then you get them in there, and now you're used to the money they're giving, or you're used to you want to. It's natural to want to build a church and have a lot of people there, but you got to make sure you do it by preaching everything, not just the nice things,
Mhm.
but everything.
Yeah.
So that people are there under false pretenses, because in the end, when things get bad, they're going to leave, they're going to fold,
Mhm.
because they weren't there for the right reasons anyhow.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's see how we doing on time. So we had maybe then talked about having a bit of a discussion on morals. I think we've talked about some of these things already. Like we've broached the subject of someone saying, who am I hurting? But let's just maybe in the remaining time, let's talk about morals in general. Like you said, I think what you just said is a really nice segue to this, because in speaking the truth, it's potentially speaking something that someone doesn't want to hear, but that they need to hear. So we've talked in here before about sort of the idea of morals at large, as in, we need God in order to have any sort of absolute morals. And usually when we're talking about those things, it's the big picture things that everyone can agree on, that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, that pillaging and destroying is wrong. The big stuff that you're trying, in that case, we're trying to talk about things that everyone just agrees with, and then based on that agreement, then we can talk about, well, God as transcendent is the one who's basically setting those standards. But then if we go sort of to the other side, where now we have disagreements about what is morally right or wrong, maybe the question is, someone might say, well, why does Christianity care so much about what I do, about these moral issues? Why do they spend time? Why would Christianity spend time focusing on these moral ideas? What would you say to that?
Well, because salvation is making us godlike. So if God knows something's taking us the other way, he's going to say, don't do that. And he's the only one that can do that. He's got, not because he's just the authority, and we may have said this before in objective morals, but he's omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be wrong based on lack of knowledge. He's perfectly good. Can't be led astray by less than perfectly good motive. He's perfect love. He also always has to have the other's highest good in mind. He's the creator. He's got the natural authority. So when he says something is wrong, he can't be wrong when he says it, It has to be our highest good to do it, and he has the authority to say it. So because he wants to make us godlike, he knows what's going to get us closer to that and what's going to take us further away from that. And whether we understand it or not really isn't the point. The point is that he understands it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was first Christian, I didn't really understand why I had to stop partying and so on. But I did because I knew that God said, don't get drunk or don't get high or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I trusted that he knows what he's talking about. Now, since then, I've come to realize why. But you have to have that authority, because if we are the authority, if human beings are the authority, well, we're not omniscient. We're not perfectly good. We aren't perfect love. We can be wrong. We can lead people astray. So we need somebody who can't lead somebody astray, who's always going to do what is good. So as long as we keep in mind that salvation is becoming godlike, this isn't just a legalistic thing where God says, okay, I'm going to make some random rules here to see if you'll keep them or not. If you don't keep them, I'm going to throw you into hell. It's not that. He's doing what's best for us. He's saying, this takes you away. This is not the way this is supposed to be. This does you harm. And whether we fully understand it or not doesn't matter. He fully understands it. Now, for the most part, in America, we don't have that. We're secular. Mm-hmm. So we're relying on the dominant media and the dominant educational establishment to tell us what's right and wrong. Well, how do they know? Mm-hmm. Where's their source of truth? They don't have a source of truth. They're just making stuff up. So we're following these people. They're just making stuff up. And, all this stuff that they're saying is anti-Christian at the same time. So they're making it up, but they're being as anti-Christian as they can while they're doing it. But even if you take the anti-Christian stuff away, they're just making it up. Mm-hmm. They have no source of truth. They're not looking to God is the only ultimate source of truth. Anything other than he can be wrong. So no matter what philosopher they're looking to, or what, new writing they're looking to, new psychology or sociology or whatever, it's all just made up by man. And they cannot, if they're honest, they cannot assure you that you're going in the right direction, mm-hmm. that you're not doing harm to yourself. Remember, homosexuality used to be a mental illness. Transgender used to be a mental illness, according to psychologists, and now they're fine. Mm-hmm. So were they wrong then and right now? Are they right now and wrong then? Are they wrong now and right? How do you know? Mm-hmm. Because in the end, again, they're just making it up. Mm-hmm. That's all they're doing. And if we're following them, we're fools, because we're following people who are just making stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at a certain point, it was helpful for me to think about, the way that we trust God is sort of like a small child trusting their parent, assuming now, obviously, as you said, God knows better than any parent or any person. That's why he's the trustworthy, he has that perspective and so on. But if you think of, a parent that sets some basic rules for their child, it isn't just to be sadistic or to just take away fun or whatever, when they tell their child, don't play in the street. They're doing it because they know well enough that it's a dangerous thing, that could cause harm to them in some way. And I think ultimately, all the morals that we can encounter within Christianity, and like you said, if whether we understand it or not, those things are protective, and especially protective of the relationship, because we have all sorts of muddled ideas about what we want to do and what our desires are and what our needs are that our society, feeds us. And then God says, well, don't do this thing. And, it is in the end best if we just trust that is right. But like you said, over time you can learn, and it becomes clear. I do think that as you get older, and hopefully, within Christianity, as that relationship deepens, you can see, things that maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago you wouldn't have thought twice to do, and you might now say, oh, this thing is an impediment for me. This is kind of blocking this relationship where I don't feel, connected to God. I don't experience, whatever. I don't experience grace or warmth or whatever. I don't know. In the end, it's all about. It is all about that relationship, and so those things, anything that's going to impede that relationship, is going to be harmful to us.
Yeah, and it's all about who's going to be God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are we going to be God, or is God going to be God? And right now, the secularism is all about us being God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think, therefore I am, you know, was that famous saying by, get the prophet's name, or not the prophet, this philosopher's name right now.
Descartes, I think.
Descartes. I think, therefore I am. People say, well, yeah, but he was trying to show God. It doesn't matter. He didn't really do it that well, as far as I'm concerned, at least who the God is.
Yeah.
But,
sure.
you know, he starts with us. Everything starts with us now.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, and we may have said this before, but what happened is the philosophers back then ultimately failed to show who God is, starting with us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have today, you can't know who God is, because everything starts from us. We're not looking to God to give us revelation. We only see what we can know. So we can maybe, you know, gather enough evidence to believe that God exists, and that's you know, intuitive within us anyhow. But we've realized we can't start from ourselves in some sort of infallible proof that who God is.
Mm-hmm.
So we've said, okay, we can't know. So we're going to be God. So we get to choose who we have sex with and when. We get to choose what our gender is going to be. We get to choose when life begins. We get to choose all these things, whether we can be intoxicated or not. It's all up to us now, because we're the gods now. And that's all, it always comes back to that. Who's going to be God? And, you know, like, atheist is atheist because he doesn't want God to exist. Why? Because he doesn't want to do what God says to do.
Mm-hmm.
The agnostic wants to believe you can't know if there's a God or not, because he doesn't want to know if there's a God or not. People say you can't know why we exist, or you can't know who the God is, say that because they don't want to know who the God is. And why is all this? Because we don't want to do what God says to do. That's what it always comes down to. Who's going to be God, us or God? Same thing with Adam and Eve. And it's the same thing with us today. Who's going to be God? And right now we're in the secular mantra, which is we are God.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we're making a mess of things.
Yeah, and we can become, and yet the message from our culture is that, you know, it's never been any better. We've never been more connected. We're getting better and better and better. You know, we're going to have.
And yet there's all those mental illnesses from this younger generation, even though they're the most connected generation ever, they're the one with the most mental illnesses.
Absolutely. So maybe in the remaining time then, if we could say, if we could focus then, because we're going to kind of, I think, going forward, talk about particular moral topics. If we start with, how about drunkenness and getting high, something like this. Someone might say, again, you know, who am I hurting by doing this? So as a Christian, can you explain, you know, like I can remember being in high school and one of my friends was like, getting drunk's not one of the 10 commandments, you know. Is that, you know, why is that wrong? You know, and
well,
again,
maybe there's more than 10. We can start with that. But sometimes I tell them, well, okay, we can look at it this way. Sometimes you can see these things by weighing out the positives and the negatives. Okay, so negatives of drunkenness are things like it erodes away your ability to think clearly. So that's a negative. Erodes away your ability to make wise judgments, which is connected to that, but that's, you know, a negative. It erodes away your ability to control your body, negative. Erodes away your ability to, or you act like a fool and an idiot. You know, so these are all pretty heavy negatives. So what's the positive? It's fun. That outweighs everything, at least in the college student mind, and probably in others too. I actually had some adults, I think they were at some conference here for sheriffs or something, and I was talking about some moral on these and why I was wrong, and they said, oh, well, it's fun. So if that's how we're going to choose our morals, then nothing's wrong, because you can have fun raping, murdering, pillaging, and destroying. Yeah. You can have fun at anything. So I think at Penn State, a lot of it, though, is peer pressure, because, well, now everybody knows you come to college, it's time to party at college. wasn't always like that. That really started like a weekly thing all the time back in the 60s and 70s. That's the way it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, you come to college as a lowly freshman, and your parents bring you, and they unpack your stuff, and they take you to Walmart. And everybody here who's a resident knows not to go to Walmart on moving day, because all the parents are there getting their kids stuff. Maybe you get them something to eat. You come back to the dorm, you say goodbye, and now you're all of a sudden all alone in the midst of 40,000 people. What do? Seems like everybody else knows somebody but you. First thing you're going to want to do is make friends somehow. But basically, from that first day, there's somebody running up and down the hall saying, here's a party, there's a party, let's go out and party or whatever. So you want to make friends. So you go with them and you make friends. And since you made those friends getting drunk, you're going to keep them getting drunk for the rest of your college career, more than likely. But what if the peer pressure were different? What if when you came to Penn State, the vast majority of students thought if you went out and got drunk, you were a lowlife and loser? Do you think you'd have the next freshman class coming in, rushing to get drunk, bragging about it to their friends, making a big deal of it, walking down the streets drunk? No, so it's all basically peer pressure driven, and you can't show that it does you good. Yes, it's fun, and you meet people, but all those other negatives, like if somebody gave you a pill, they said, if you take this pill for the next 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it is, it'll erode away your ability to think clearly, make wise judgments, control your body, you act like a fool and idiot, but you won't have any fun. Nobody's taking that pill because those negatives are so negative. Any one of those is so negative that nobody would take a pill that did any one of those things. But because it's fun, people will go and do it. Mm-hmm. So that it shows, this isn't just amongst college students, but it's really amongst many of us today. It shows our way of thinking. We don't think things through anymore. Society says it's okay. It's enjoyable to do. I like it, so I'm going to do it. Whether it's drunkenness or some manner of sexual thing or any other thing that we can think is pleasurable or fun, we're going to do it just because it's pleasurable or fun. Mm-hmm. So you take about Aristotle or Plato or any of these great philosophers or whatever, if they came back today and they said, oh, the intellectual elite of the modern day, this isn't just one little philosophical school over here. It's basically all the intellectual elite are saying something is good because it's fun. What would they think about that? Yeah. So, but that's pretty much and the same with drugs. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe a different high, but it's the same thing. It's enjoyable. I like it. I have fun at it. It doesn't matter that it does all these negative things. Mm-hmm. I still like it and it's fun, so I'm going to do it.
What would you say to the person who says it's some sort of mind expanding thing, or helps them to learn about themselves?
Yeah. Well, smoking pot or whatever. In the beginning, it can give you a different perspective on things, but it's still ultimately self-destructive down the road. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine used to say, this is why we're still getting high. Yeah, I write all these things. And I think they're so great when I write them. And I look at them the next day and I thought, no, that was just drug-induced drivel. Uh-huh. So that's pretty much what it is. It seems so wonderful when you're in it. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not saying that in the beginning, it might not give you a different perspective on things. Maybe it does. But ultimately, it's self-destructive. Mm-hmm. So, the devil always throws stuff in there, right? He's not going to entice you through something that's obviously only self-destructive. He's going to try to put something good in there. It's fun. It gives you new perspective. You can say some of the music that was created in the 60s once they started to get into drugs and so on was very creative and so on. And it was, but then it just always goes downhill. They always end up in rehab. They always end up having to stop. And the music always goes downhill eventually. So yeah, it's a deception. It sucks you in because every good deception has to have something good in it, or it's not going to suck you in. Mm-hmm. But the overall effect of it is destructive. Absolutely. So it's like it's the same thing. And fun is the positive. It is a positive. It's okay to have fun, but it's just all the negatives that come along with it. Yeah. There's other ways of having fun. There's other ways of expanding your mind, like finding God. that can expand your mind, in reality and in truth, and
Mhm.
much further than some drug-induced drivel that you're going to end up with.
Yeah.
So this stuff is it has that semi-positive thing, but in the end, there's other ways to have fun, and there's other ways to expand your mind that don't have all those negatives. And with God, ultimately can expand it eternally.
Yeah.
Always going to be expanding it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for laying that out. Like, one of the things that you had said before is that sometimes people who've grown up in this culture, they've never heard the other side of the argument. So it's good to kind of lay down some of those ideas.
Yeah. Did I say on air? Was that off air? About the lady who brought her class out.
I can't recall.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
we'll just throw it out there again.
Sure.
But this lady brought her class out to talk about abortion last fall. And as I was answering their questions and giving basic pro-life responses, it became clear that most of those students had never heard them before. And it became clear that even she hadn't heard some of them before. You can tell by their facial expressions. So here they are on a college campus, and they've never heard these things before because they don't go there. They get all their news and all their things from the same sources, and they're all pro-choice sources, and pro-lifers are evil, and they just want to take away your rights and keep you from reproductive rights or whatever it is they call it. They never hear the other side. And even when they just hear it once, it's not going to stay with most of them, because they're going to walk away and they're going to go right back into that same thing, and they're going to be overwhelmed by everything they've ever heard before. So it's one of those things where oftentimes you have to hear it a number of times. But even when it became clear to me that the professor, she was an older professor, she wasn't just someone fresh out of college, hadn't heard these arguments before. It shows what a great mountain we have to climb here.
Yeah.
Try to get people just to hear the arguments.
Absolutely.
Much less accept them.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully God can use some of those words to cut through that, to cut through that mountain, basically, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, and God can take those, and that's what we do. We throw stuff out there, and we allow God to do whatever he can do with it. Hopefully he can do something with it, but he has to do something with it. All we can do is put the stuff out there and sow the seed, so to speak. And he has to take it into the heart and show that this is true. And if the person's not willing to hear it, then but that's our job. Our job is to throw the stuff out there, and it's between God and the person who hears it to do everything else.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's probably as good a stopping point as any. Thanks for being on with me again, Gary. Congratulations on getting through yet another semester out there at Penn State.
Yeah, we got through another one.
Yep. So we'll stop there. I guess we'll continue with these talks probably about this time next week.
Go from moral to moral to moral. Something
like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, Gary. Have a good night.
All right. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.